Hello, ladies and gentlemen. In just a few moments, we'll be taking you live here for episode 52 of Jimmy at the Crossroads with your host, Jimmy Sengenberger. Should be a great show. We're looking forward to it. Come on back with us to the Crossroads. Stay tuned.
And that, my friends, is how America was made great once again. Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics. Radio broadcaster master, now the celeb on the web. He's the smarty of the party. He's in cahoots with the grassroots. Jimmy at the Crossroads brings you thought-provoking commentary, hard-hitting interviews, original satire, and the best bumper music known to man. Jimmy at the Crossroads!
Gonna talk money, gonna talk politics, great for all generations. Oh, what a great mix, I said. Gonna talk money, Gonna talk politics. Grateful all generations. Oh, what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. People want answers, they want to understand. They come to the crossroads and Jimmy gives them the plan. I said, gonna talk money, gonna talk politics. Great for all generations, oh what a great mix. I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense. Come on, Jimmy, what you got?
Hello, my friends, and welcome to another edition of the web show with the best gosh darn theme song intro tune you'll find anywhere. Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. I am Jimmy Sengenberger, doing our best here, indeed, to make sense out of nonsense day in and day out. Thanks for being a part of the program that brings you engaging, intelligent talk, sang style. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today, and a very interesting show it should be indeed. Later on, the third segment of the program, we will have on the show John Schnatter, a.k.a. Papa John, who built Papa John's Pizza into one of the largest pizza franchise companies in the world. He founded the company in 1984. It's a very familiar name and brand. We're going to talk with Papa John about small business and revitalizing small business. What are the things small businesses need to keep in mind? What are some of the maybe the policy things? What are the different steps that need to be taken in order to revitalize small business in America once we get out of this pandemic and as we reopen the economy? We'll talk with him about that. And then in the next segment, we will get into a very difficult and horrific topic. In fact, it is the one I want to address in my opening commentary today, and that is the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis. We will be joined today by Roshini Rajkumar, who, of course, is a good friend of the show. She is in Minneapolis, is a talk show host there, and is a former attorney, I think she's still a current attorney. She's also a former TV reporter and a communication specialist. She's going to join us along with retired longtime lieutenant in the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department. I think for 30 years he was in the police force. Lieutenant Stephen Rogers will join us. They'll join us together for a joint conversation about what happened to George Floyd as well as some of the fallout. Indeed, today I want to talk about this atrocity. You look at the tape. Senseless loss of life. There's an investigation underway. We need to find the results of that investigation. But I'm so glad that these police officers have been fired and that they are under investigation by the force. And you need to get things rolling forward for prosecution, because this does look like it may well have been murder. Now, we cannot draw specific conclusions. Nobody should. Guilty until, or not guilty is the guilty or not guilty, innocent until proven guilty. That's the phrase. But you watch this videotape. Let's put up cut 4. And not only does your heart break for the travesty here, but the idea that a police officer would have his knee on the neck of a man for more than 5 minutes as he gasps for breath cries out for his mother, and says he can't breathe. I mean, you cannot help but watch it in terror. Now let's see it.
I can't breathe. Please, the knee in my neck. I can't breathe shit.
Bro, get up, get in the car, man.
I will.
Get up, get in the car.
I can't move.
Of course he can't move. He can't get out of that position. An officer's knee on his neck as he has the life sucked out of him. Finally pronounced dead at the hospital. But that is heinous. Every time I see that video, it makes me completely and utterly sick to my stomach. There is a reason why you're not seeing anybody defending these officers in any way. And I think it's because it's so blatant what's happening here. Even though, again, from a legal system standpoint, innocent till proven guilty, they need to have their day in court. But we can see it right there, right in front of us on the screen. A couple of days ago, the mayor of Minneapolis, where this atrocity took place, spoke out about how the officers were fired and also an investigation was being initiated.
We've seen black men die at the hands of law enforcement, or more recently, not law enforcement, for no reason. There will be an investigation conducted into the civil rights violations by the FBI, and I think that was absolutely the right call.
Pretty swift action at least being taken as far as removing them, beginning investigations, and so forth. Hopefully, the slowdown of the court processes across this country that we have been seeing because of coronavirus, COVID-19, doesn't slow down this process, because we do need justice to be done. Now, at the same time as we are all trying to understand what happened, as we are trying to process something so vile, there are riots going on in the streets of Minneapolis. Last night, there were flames. Literally, there was fire happening in South Minneapolis. You can see it right there. We have seen Target stores ransacked and other shops vandalized. You can see it right there. Now, I understand the anguish and how heinous this was. It was an atrocity. It looks like murder. We need to have the legal process pan out, of course, but it is something that should break and is breaking every American's heart right now. But at the same time, that doesn't justify riots like that, vandalizing people's property. It doesn't justify anything to that extreme, but I don't think that it is just because of the killing of George Floyd. I suspect that this also has to do with the fact that people have been cooped up in their homes for months and have been told by authorities, trust us because you should trust us. Trust us when we say you need to be in your homes because we say you should be in your homes. Just trust us. We have a crisis of credibility in America. And a police officer with 3 colleagues participating in it, a police officer killing an unarmed man, as we saw on tape there, doesn't help with the trust. Doesn't help with the credibility crisis. It worsens it. There is no excuse for any of this that we're seeing right now. But you can, I think, understand a little bit more when you have a crisis of credibility. I mean, I've been saying for a while how concerned I am about the mental health aspects of everything, how concerned I've been about the notion of civil unrest being a possibility at some point. That's what this is. Let's put it up back on the screen, Nathan Matoush. This is a form of civil unrest that we are seeing. And essentially you had a match lit by the atrocity of George Floyd's death at the hands of police officers. So it was kind of like this was the thing maybe that has started to unravel what we've got right now. And I hope and pray that cooler heads will prevail, that the civil unrest will settle down. It is somewhat ironic that some of these people who are vandals and engaging in riot behavior, not just the protest, but the riot behavior and the vandalism, are wearing masks, so you can't easily identify those individuals, but they're told you have to wear masks if you're out and about. So keep that in mind. But the whole situation that we are in right now has more aspects to it, I think, than just one. It's not just about, I mean, nobody goes and steals from other people and burns buildings and what have you because of one horrendous incident. There are different things at play, and there's no excuse for stealing or destroying property. But that's why I think there are multiple aspects at play in regards to the riots. But we also need these police officers to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. When we return here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we will be joined by Roshini Rajkumar on the communications side, and also she's on the ground in Minnesota. She lives in the Minneapolis area in the Twin Cities. She will give us perspective from Minneapolis. And we will also be joined simultaneously by retired police lieutenant Stephen Rogers, who will give us his thoughts from the law enforcement perspective on what we're seeing unfold in the streets, but even more significantly, perhaps, I say perhaps because we're seeing, I mean, who knows what harm is happening across the city, but that the extinguishing, you look at that video, George Floyd's life was extinguished. So not perhaps, the loss of life. I mean, we're going to talk about it when we return. Jimmy at the Crossroads, I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler.
Thanks for coming to this medical convention with me, Captain. You're a true friend.
You promised there'd be green women.
Oh, I'd like you to meet some of my colleagues. This is Dr. Scholes, podiatrist.
How do you do?
And this is Dr. Pepper.
Gesundheit.
Oh, and here comes Dr. Phil. He's a psychiatrist.
Well, every pancake has two sides. And
You're right, Doc. He is boring.
I'm right here.
And this is Dr. Spock, child psychologist.
Goodgy.
And of course, this is Dr. Octopus.
Oh, hello. How do you do?
How do you do?
How do you do? Hi, give me 5. Pleased to meet you. Give me 5. How do you do?
You do.
So, Doc Ock, what's your field?
I am a proctologist.
Oh, I wish I hadn't shaken all 8 hands.
Well, did the captain bring enough hand sanitizer? Tune in next time when we hear...
And this is Dr. Quinn, medicine woman.
Finally, a woman.
Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya? Hey, how are ya?
Ugh.
On Starship Winkler.
America's politics are crazy. The culture is in flux. That's why we work hard to help you keep up.
More politics, more culture, and more access.
We focus on the biggest stories of the day with some of the biggest names in politics and punditry.
Go to our website, WashingtonExaminer.com. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Okay, welcome to the auditions for the official voice of Jimmy at the Crossroads. Name, please?
Kermit the Frog.
Okay, go ahead.
Hi-oh, Jimmy the show host here.
Next.
Next! I told you they wouldn't go for it, Froggy! Hiya!
And you are?
Stewie Griffin.
Can you sing a bumper song?
Oh, absolutely. La 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 la, la 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 la. This is so beneath me.
Thank you. Okay, next, previous experience in voice work.
I was a duck.
Next.
Affleck.
Okay, Dr. Evil, you're up.
Okay, everyone. Welcome to Jimmy at the frickin' Crossroads. We invite you to watch for $1 billion.
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Mr. Simpson.
Who's talking?
Mr. Simpson.
What?
Over here.
Oh, hey.
Let's hear the announcer voice.
I can't do an announcer voice. Oh, but I can do Mr. Burns. Announcer guy, eh? Excellent.
George W. Bush.
I'm here to auditionify for the announcerification process there for Jimmy Mushroomburger.
It's Sengenberger.
Jimmy In-N-Out Burger.
Next. And you are?
The name is Doc Brown.
Okay, go ahead, please.
Welcome back to the Crossroads.
I love your enthusiasm. When can you start?
Last year.
Welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, your host for the program here on this Thursday, May 28th, 2020. Such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you here today. As always, if you want to join into the festivities, of course, you can tweet at me 24/7, 365 at Sang Center. Remember, that's Sang with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. Please also be sure to log on to the website for the program, jimmyatthecrossroads.com, and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already, youtube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads, and also follow yours truly on Facebook, Jimmy Sengenberger Media Personality, Facebook.com/Jimmy Sengenberger Pro. And be sure to follow our partners here on Jimmy at the Crossroads at The Washington Examiner on Twitter, on Facebook, and on YouTube, and of course at WashingtonExaminer.com. So we're working on getting one of our guests lined up here, Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, set to join us momentarily. But first, I am pleased to welcome back to Jimmy at the Crossroads from the Minneapolis area in Minnesota, Roshini Rajkumar, good friend of the show, of course, strategic communication and crisis coach to C-suite executives. She hosts Real Talk with Roshini on WCCO Radio in Minnesota and the Real Leaders with Roshini podcast. She is a licensed attorney and former TV reporter, author of the book Communicate That, her website, ownyourwow.com. Roshini Rajkumar joins us today here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Roshini, welcome back to the program. It's good to have you.
Thanks, Jimmy. It's definitely a real heavy and hard day in Minneapolis. This is where I live, and the people of Minneapolis, the people of Minnesota, are saddened by what we're seeing and what's really being revealed to all of your eyes across the nation and the globe. It's definitely a tragic time right now.
Let me ask you for your perception of what happened. I mean, it doesn't seem to be too difficult to tell. Of course, we need the legal process to ferret out. But his life, George Floyd's life, was extinguished with a knee on his neck by a police officer. That's clear.
Yes, it really does look that way. Now, again, as someone who is a licensed attorney, I do like the process to play itself out. We still have some more video to look at. We have the body cams from those officers to look at, so we can see hopefully a little more what the reality check on what was actually happening at the moment of contact, that initial contact with George Floyd that would eventually lead to handcuffs and him on the ground and that terrible image of the knee on his neck. So right now, that is what we're also waiting for. But as that is happening, the protests, which some started as silent protests, have turned into loud protests, have turned into riots, have turned into fires. Not far from where I actually live, maybe a few miles at the most, is where those fire scenes you've seen, buildings burned down, auto shop burned down, many businesses that are already hurting during this pandemic are now gone and definitely out of business. And that community, the people in that nearby area, having to live with the noise overnight of the riots and the continuing noise. But this is what we don't want to see. I mean, this is truly a crisis for our city. And we are hearing from different leaders, and I'm sure you'll want to get into some of those reactions, but that's just my initial reaction. And it's actually been very difficult to come up with words, Jimmy. There's a lot of sadness for all of us here, really.
Yeah, I mean, it clearly is a horrific circumstance, top to bottom. And the thing about these riots, though, is I'm not so sure that we can just say it's because of what happened to George Floyd, because you also have a couple of different dynamics at play, which is, one, people are taking advantage of this situation. I mean, there's no excuse, no justification, no reason for this type of outright vandalism and destruction and theft of property. But also, we do have the reality of the shutdowns. People have been cooped up in their homes for months. And I can imagine that some of us are not too surprised from the standpoint of civil unrest being something we were fearing. And I know I was fearing that civil unrest might be something that would happen.
Exactly. Civil unrest was probably going to happen regardless of this tragedy going on. But those images you've seen of the Target being looted and people just visibly, very, very intentionally going in and stealing items. So these crimes that are happening in and around what started as more of a peaceful protest, that isn't the right reaction to the death of George Floyd.
Oh, by far, by far. I mean, you're destroying property, you're stealing property if you are participating in a riot like that. That's for darn sure. All right, I'm very pleased to be joined as well, in addition to Roshini Rajkumar on the ground in Minneapolis, by Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, who served in the United States Air Force, who's in the Navy Reserve, who is also someone who for about 30 years or so was in the police force in Nutley, New Jersey, retired as a lieutenant. And Lieutenant Rogers, it's good to have you on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Welcome to the show, along with Roshini Rajkumar, myself, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Well, my pleasure to be here. Thank you.
It's great to have you here. So I want to get your initial reaction, please, sir, to, first of all, the extinguishing of life, to put it mildly, of George Floyd, especially from your decades as a police officer and detective. What do you make of it?
The damage that these police officers created is far-reaching, well beyond the borders of that city. These officers drained the lifeblood out of positive police-community relations that was built over many decades across this country. And I've got to tell you, Jimmy, what troubles me is that the other officers on the scene did absolutely nothing to stop this individual officer who had his knee on this man's neck while the man is pleading for his life. And unfortunately, and I'm sorry to say this, there's a blue wall of culture in police departments that must be torn down by the officers themselves. So they weren't there to protect and serve. They killed and they stained the profession, and it's something that is having far-reaching repercussions across the country. This is an unspeakable tragedy.
And Lieutenant Rogers, when you look at this, as I agree, an unspeakable tragedy, I think that's well said. What do you make of the investigation that's underway, and do you think that it's being handled well in the community there? It seems to be, and then we'll get Roshini's thoughts as a Minneapolis resident, but what are your thoughts from a distance as an officer?
What I'm pleased about is that President Trump had immediately directed the DOJ to immediately begin a federal investigation. I haven't seen that in many cases throughout my career. So the DOJ is involved. We have obviously local police and state police involved. But Jimmy, the importance of the federal government of being involved is that there is now a breakdown in trust between local police and the people. But the DOJ usually focuses in on every fine thing involving these investigations. So I'm happy to see the word immediate. That is absolutely imperative.
Let's look to a couple of days ago. The mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, had these words to say, and then we'll get Roshini's reaction.
We've seen black men die at the hands of law enforcement, or more recently, not law enforcement, for no reason. There will be an investigation conducted into the civil rights violations by the FBI, and I think that was absolutely the right call.
Roshini Rajkumar, what do you make of how the mayor of Minneapolis and other officials are handling this right now?
Well, it's a really good question, because that's a clip where I think we can agree what Mayor Frey is saying. We can all agree with that. He's also been very vocal about bringing in the race card in this and that angle. And for someone who's in his role as a mayor, he has shown a lot of emotion, and that may not play out well for the city. Coming into this, the city already had some community and policing issues. And I think they were making some headway, but there were definitely some big gaps. So when a tragedy like this happens, it only splinters that more. And the mayor has been very much on the side of George Floyd, which he should be, but usually the police also look, and Lieutenant Rogers can address this better than I, but usually the police would look to their mayor to support them, make sure justice is done, get questions asked. He's pretty much already put that main police officer whose knee was on George Floyd's neck behind bars. He's already done it. And myself, as a licensed attorney, I don't like to hear that kind of language coming from a mayor until charges are filed, until more of the process is played out, even though, look, the emotions and what we're watching all really do point in that direction, but we need to see more of the process played out. Our Attorney General for the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, has, by contrast, been a little calmer in his press conferences and is calling for the justice system to do its job. So I, like Lieutenant Rogers, am also very happy the feds are involved. The FBI, with our own Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, are overseeing this investigation. And that's the way to go, because it has to be taken out of the hands of the Minneapolis police.
We're joined by Roshini Rajkumar in Minneapolis, as well as Lieutenant Stephen Rogers. And Lieutenant Rogers, let me ask you, in terms of the handling of an investigation of officers who've committed an atrocity like this, how is that handled, and what should we be looking for as things play out from the investigation standpoint, sir?
Well, the police are certainly going to be looking at all of the video footage. That's something that is imperative with regard to this investigation. Now, that video footage is, I've got to tell you, you know, I've heard reports that he resisted. Let's say he resisted. It still is no excuse to doing what they did, because the video reveals at the time that the officer put his knee on this guy's neck, he wasn't resisting. But that's the importance of video footage that years ago people didn't have when they ran into incidents like this. Witnesses are going to be very important. Who saw what and when, what happened prior to. But the fact of the matter is that with regard to the mayor's statements, and I'm glad the other guest on mentioned the Attorney General, who was very measured, these politicians have to be careful what they say, because they could prejudice a case. Regardless of what we've seen, you know, there's a process, and the process must be followed. But I would say, Jimmy, more importantly, at least to me as a law enforcement professional, is for the police officers themselves, perhaps even the union, to come out and say, look, we don't condone this type of behavior. This is not indicative of what police officers do during the normal course of their duty. 99% of the cops across this country are heroes. They're good people. The men and women who wear that uniform truly protect and serve. Absolutely. Unfortunately, something like this kind of erases all of what they do on a daily basis. So that's the importance of not only mayors and politicians to come out, but police officers themselves to come out and say, look, these are things that are unacceptable. We don't condone it.
Roshini Rajkumar, one thing that I find interesting about this particular situation is that in the past, when we've seen Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown, even Freddie Gray, circumstances where unarmed black men have been killed by police officers, the way in which it was handled was a lot more divided in terms of the coverage of it, in terms of commentary. With this one, everybody seems to be equally outraged about this and to believe that not only there needs to be an investigation, but also deeply believe that there needs to be consequences. What do you make of what might be different about this particular circumstance compared to some of the past incidents we've seen?
Well, you know, optics really win out, and often the first images rule the day. And in this situation, the first images really were that piece of video was out there, that several minutes, whether you watched the whole thing on Facebook or you saw parts of it on different newscasts, that was the damning video, and it was terrible. And no one who's a human being could look at that video and think there's anything right about it. Well, no matter what other angles of cameras got anything else going on that evening, that video is what we all saw first and what we all made our initial judgments on. So that's why it is important for leaders to stay reasoned at this time. You know, there are some people in Minneapolis that are a little concerned if Mayor Frey does continue to be as antagonistic toward the police at this point, it will continue to cause more violence. And there are some who believe that is partly what may have led to some of the violence we've already seen. So that is why I'm just such a strong believer in calm. You know, the more powerful you are on the outside starts with the calmer you are on the inside. And so the leaders who can bring us through this at all levels, both government as well as law enforcement, are going to be the ones that remember we have a Constitution. It applies to everyone. Whether you are innocent or guilty, the Constitution applies to you.
Well said. Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, I would like you to give some comment on that as well, but also I want to play this surveillance footage that was also released yesterday, and it shows, to your point, and we've got it up here, to your point about not resisting arrest. I mean, if you look at the surveillance footage, what we see here, it doesn't really seem like there is a resistance going on that fits with any claims that there was some sort of a resisting of arrest. What do you make of that footage, as well as what I was saying before about the fact that we seem to have a united front in terms of our view on this, as opposed to some of the past instances?
Well, look, a picture's worth more than 1,000 words. These police officers knew full well that they were responding to what crime? A forged check? Nothing about weapons, nothing about resisting, nothing about a possible violent confrontation, although you're always prepared for those things. But this fella, in no way, shape, or form, was resisting as far as we know. And I believe that he never resisted. But saying that, to the point of the other guests with regard to the comments of the mayor and others, it would best serve the community if the mayor got up there and said, look, he's going to gather with community leaders. He's going to sit them down with the police chief, and they're going to do everything they could to calm the nerves of a lot of people. This is how it works. This is what true leadership is, to calm everyone, not to come up with judgments before there's a process that is to be followed. So that would serve the best interests of the people. And secondly, what is very important is that they got a big job ahead of them now in Minneapolis and now around the country, because whether that was a white man or a black man, I've got to tell you, Jimmy, you said it all, the outrage across the board, no matter what color you are, no matter what ethnicity you are, the outrage across the board is actually bigger than I've ever seen. But also remember this. this is on the heels of what happened, last week? There was a young black man shot in another state because he was running down the street. I mean, you know what? There's something wrong somewhere when people feel that they could just, whether a victim is black or white, that police officers or anyone has the authority to just get up and take these severe actions. So my point is that the police are going to absolutely mention in their investigation rules and regulations weren't followed, use of force was too extensive, and on and on and on. But at the end of the day, who do you trust? And I still ask people, trust your cops, trust your police, and work together to rebuild that trust.
You know, to that point, from Lieutenant Rogers, Roshini Rajkumar, from the communication standpoint, which is one of your signature areas of expertise, how do you think we need to have politicians in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, and across the country help to bring that calm and soothe the nation and soothe the communities, but also to make sure that we're getting the right messages across to what Lieutenant Rogers was saying?
I definitely agree with Lieutenant Rogers that trust is a big thing, and there's been such a breakdown of trust even prior to this incident. So first and foremost, these leaders need to listen to all of the parties. You know, listening is one of those arts of communication that is very neglected, but this is very important right now, the listening. Also, not pointing fingers. I mean, the video unfortunately really does say it all, that life is not going to be good for that officer as well as his 3 colleagues. So that's a long road ahead for those 4 officers. I hope that the community around Minneapolis, the state, and the country don't continue to add fuel to the fire. You've probably seen a lot of the different kinds of remarks on Twitter and other social platforms. At this point, we need to wait. We need to see what happens by way of the justice system. We need to let the county attorney in Hennepin County, which is where Minneapolis sits, do its job. We need to let the feds do their job and see what happens coming out of those things. And listening to one another is the first step in that. So this investigation will go on. We may see some other video. The different law enforcement and public figures have to do their work. But it's also happening in real time in a society that is bogged down in a global pandemic. Right. So we have to also remember, leaders have to also remember that it is like the worst kind of crisis within a crisis. They have to go above and beyond themselves to call for calm among their constituents. And to that end, I would give the Minneapolis police chief some credit. You haven't shown video of him yet today, but he has, for the most part, and he does have a pretty calm way about him, he has remained fairly calm, and he is the one who fired those 4 officers in pretty swift order. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for anyone who's speaking to the media, anyone involved in this case, to listen and to remain calm. And that is the only way we can go forward. And throwing names and throwing accusations will get us nowhere.
I think that is very well said. So final question for you both. I want to put up footage again, we played it before, of the riots happening on the streets in Minneapolis, and go to Roshini first since you're on the ground there, and then to Lieutenant Rogers. What do you make of this, and what can elected officials say to help try to get people to stop this kind of vandalism and violence and chaos that is now destroying businesses and lives in ways that are going to leave a lasting mark? Roshini.
Jimmy, my heart just hurts when I see this video, and have been watching this video since yesterday, and it's only getting worse. These elected officials need to call to their constituencies. They need to bring together other influencers they have in these various communities, both communities of color as well as white communities, no matter where they are. All elected officials right now need to reach out to their constituencies and beg for conversation. Let your constituents know you are listening and you are ready to listen, but also challenge them that if they are going to protest, to do it peacefully and to not bring violence into the equation, because violence is only begetting more harm and it's causing far more victims.
Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, your thoughts on what we're seeing on the streets in Minneapolis amidst I call it a crisis of credibility, where nobody seems to be trusting anybody in terms of authority or media or wherever else.
Jimmy, how adults handle a crisis has profound impact on our children and our grandchildren. And we need to keep that in mind as parents, as grandparents, and make sure that our children are not exposed to what we are seeing here. But more importantly, to the point of trust, I've learned in my police career that the people you could really trust, and there's really no credibility gaps with this group I'm about to share with you, can work well with the police to calm communities. And that is the clergy. That is the people in the churches and the synagogues and the mosques and in the temples. They're the ones who speak to more people during their church services or their worship services than any politician or police officer could talk to. So my recommendation would be, you want to calm nerves, the community leaders are those that we can see every day when you open up the doors of their houses of worship. So I would recommend to the police that they get together with those individuals in those houses of worship and then reach out. Because those ushers and those men and women who work with these houses of worship, you know where they live? In the neighborhoods that are most affected by the violence. And they want help, they need help. Time for everyone to step up and to come together as partners.
Roshini Rajkumar, live in Minneapolis, and Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, formerly of the Nutley, New Jersey Police Department for about 30 years. Thank you both so much for sharing your insights today. Roshini, our hearts go out to your community. Thoughts and prayers and well wishes for a recovery from all of this. Best of luck to you, and thank you both so much for joining us today. Great conversation.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. Once again, Roshini Rajkumar and Lieutenant Stephen Rogers joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I think the very measured, very well-reasoned points. Really enjoyed that conversation. I hope you found it as insightful as I did. Urging calm. I got a little fired up in that first segment. We need to have calm. We need the process to play out, but they do need to be prosecuted, these officers, to the fullest extent of the law. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger. You are watching Jimmy at the Crossroads, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner. In just a matter of moments, we're going to shift gears to revitalizing small business in the aftermath of the pandemic, the shutdowns, what we're seeing with the current crisis across the country. We will be joined by Papa John Schnatter to talk about exactly that. He's got a new op-ed on foxnews.com that provides some interesting insights from a man who built up a pizza company to become one of the most recognizable pizza brands in America. Keep it right here. Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger in partnership with the Washington Examiner.
Now, I want to introduce to you my phenomenal partner on this resolution, the great Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Oh, beautiful.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you to all of my colleagues here that have joined us today. This is so incredible. This is such a major watershed moment, and I am so incredibly excited that we are going to transition this country into the future, and we are not going to be dragged behind by our past.
I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, and folks, we don't need some godforsaken, government-orchestrated Green New Deal to protect the environment and combat climate change. No, we need to unleash innovation through the free market. Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey, the lead sponsors of the so-called Green New Deal in Congress, won't tell you this. The mainstream media won't tell you this. But the reality is that carbon dioxide emissions in the United States in recent years have been on a downward trend. Yes, a downward trend. For example, in 2017, the USA cut our carbon dioxide emissions by about the same amount as the entire European Union increased theirs. This is remarkable, especially since 2017 was the same year that President Donald Trump withdrew the United States from the Paris Climate Accord. Not only that, but China and India are by far the biggest drivers in carbon dioxide output in the world. But what has led this revolution in the United States of reducing carbon dioxide emissions? Well, it has been the revolution in innovation. That is, the private sector has truly brought about some incredible gains in technological improvements that have resulted in this dramatic decline in carbon dioxide emissions. That's particularly, for example, with the production of oil and natural gas through increases in the technological innovations of fracking or hydraulic fracturing.
So for me, this is kind of like Groundhog Day. I'm experiencing all the same outrage and all the same predictions of apocalypse and the world is coming to an end and all the rest of it. And you know what happened when George Bush pulled out of the Kyoto Treaty? In the next 14 years, we reduced our emissions by 18%. We reduced our emissions faster than the European countries that are now criticizing Donald Trump. Our emissions right now are at 1992 levels. And it's not because of a treaty. It's not because of some piece of parchment signed in Paris or Kyoto. It's because of the free market economy, innovation, and technology. It's hydraulic fracking. It's all of these clean coal technologies that are reducing our emissions.
The reality is that the private sector has been driving these dramatic improvements in technology that has reduced carbon dioxide emissions. In other words, it is the free market that has been driving forward with combating climate change. If this is happening, and it has been happening, what we really need is to unleash more of the unlimited potential of the private sector, of the free market, of each and every individual, because that is the pathway to defeating climate change and really saving the planet, not through some government scheme. The Millennial Policy Center just came out with some great research on how we can fix environmental problems and combat climate change through the free market. To learn more, log on to millennialpolicycenter.org.
And now, the further future adventures of Starship Winkler. The captain and the ship's doctor are attending a medical convention.
And that's how gigawatts can be used to cure chronic incontinence. Thank you, thank you. And now I'd like to send everybody back to the buffet line.
Nice speech there, Doc.
Yes, nice speech. Ooh, it's time for the keynote speaker.
So, which doctor is speaking first?
Doctor who?
The doctor speaking first.
Who?
The guy on first?
Who?
What's the name of the doctor speaking first?
Who's on first?
I don't know. That's why I'm asking you.
Well, tune in next time when we hear
Third Base
on Starship Winkler.
Breaking at this hour, Jimmy Sengenberger is currently at the crossroads of politics and economics.
Certainly we want to be safe, we want our fellow citizens to be safe, but there is never a time to short-skirt the Bill of Rights.
I got Jimmy at the crossroads, making sense out of nonsense.
And ladies and gentlemen, for our final segment of episode 52 of Jimmy at the Crossroads, let's welcome back your host, Jimmy Sengenberger.
Rocking and rolling back here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner and bringing engaging, intelligent talk, Sang style. Once again, such a pleasure and a privilege to be with you today. Thanks for joining us. Tweet at me 24/7, 365 with thoughts at Sang Center, saying with an E, not an A, Center on Twitter. Please do follow me on Twitter. Also, subscribe to the YouTube channel if you have not done so already. YouTube.com/Jimmy at the Crossroads. Do the same for our partners at the Washington Examiner, and check out the website WashingtonExaminer.com. So let's talk a little bit about the economic side of things, which of course is a big topic of interest for yours truly as viewers of this program. No, one thing that we're seeing across the country with the economic malaise that we're facing are the struggles, the trials and tribulations of small businesses. that have been finding the situation precarious for them, losing their small businesses or on the verge of losing. But now we're finally starting to reopen the economy. What are things that small business owners should keep in mind as they get back to work? Let's talk about it with a man who built up a pizza company that became one of the most recognizable pizza franchise brands in the country, really in the world. John Schnatter is commonly known as Papa John, and he joins us now to talk about this very topic. Papa John, welcome to Jimmy at the Crossroads.
Hey, Jimmy. How you doing?
You know, I'm doing well. It's so great to have you on the program. Thanks for taking the time today.
Absolutely.
So let me just kind of start off from the top, because I read your op-ed that you wrote for FoxNews.com, and I found it rather interesting, because what you're talking about are some traits that small businesses need to keep in mind. Before we get to that, though, how do you assess the current lay of the land for small businesses in America today?
Well, I think to be empathetic towards any situation, you have to walk the mile in those folks' shoes, his or her shoes. And starting in the broom closet, I mean, it was tough. It was brutal. And, 50-cent beers in the front, $5 pizzas in the back, extremely tough. I can't imagine being a small business owner. At least in the broom closet, I could sell the pizza. To be shut down for 2 months and not be able to do anything is just, it's unfathomable. It's just got to be really, really tough. And my heart goes out to all the small businesses in America. But now's the time where we all have to shine and get back to work and make America great.
One of the big challenges, of course, for small businesses is not just the idea that you pour all your sweat and treasure into your own company and working very hard, but oftentimes you go out and you get investment capital. You raise that money, and then your investors are expecting a return on investment. And so for those businesses that are struggling right now, they have a lot of different things that they must be juggling in their minds at this point as they figure, how am I going to get back into business, getting things going, growing again, and being able to build up what I've worked so hard to create, but also make sure that those who took a chance on me, a risk, get their return too.
Well, this next 8 months is going to be the toughest of times for small business, and it's going to be the greatest of times for small business. We're really going to separate the great ones from the ones that are not so great. And small business, to your point, is already 10% success rate. 1 out of 10 succeed, 9 out of 10 fail. So it's already, the deck's already stacked across, and again, the small business owner. So when this opens back up, in the last month or two, I've been talking about be proactive. Get yourself in a position that when you do reopen, you're ready to go with your right team, your right positioning, your point of differentiation in the marketplace, and your concept, your rent, a business plan. Now that now it's game time. Now the clock starts, and we're on the field. We got to make it happen, and I think that requires 3 things. You got to make the effort. In this case, a superb effort. You got to be enthusiastic and extremely enthusiastic. If you're an entrepreneur and you hear no 4,000 times, and you think the answer is no, you're not successful. You're a successful entrepreneur and you hear no 4,000 times, you know the answer is yes. You got to stay positive, and of course you got to be an entrepreneur. You got to know that the field is going to change constantly, and you got to have the dichotomy to be flexible and be an entrepreneur, be creative, be innovative, tinker, trial and error, and take advantage of these opportunities.
Let's talk a little bit about the extraordinary effort that you're saying small businesses need to exert in order to get back on their feet and start growing again. Expand upon that a little bit, because obviously every small business owner is going to be doing their level best, but what does that entail? When you say effort, what do you mean?
Effort, enthusiasm, passion. You got to be passionate about what you're doing, because emotions are infectious. They're contagious. And if the leader's not excited and the leader's not pumped and the leader doesn't believe in the mission and the vision, then the team's not going to buy into it. So right now, you have to be passionate, you have to be enthusiastic, and you have to make the effort. You got to get up early and stay up late and put in 120% every minute of every day.
So when you talk about passion and sharing that with your employees, I mean, that really does seem to be fundamental, because when you're getting your team motivated to come back to work, first of all, if they haven't been and they're concerned about the virus and so forth, you want to make sure that they can feel that excitement, that energy that you're bringing back to the table, so that they're feeling inspired to be as productive as possible and to really contribute to bringing things back to where they were before, and hopefully much better as things progress.
Yeah, you got to have confidence. I mean, you really do, and that starts at the top. And you got to believe in what you're doing. You got to believe in your business. You got to believe you're going to succeed. Great leadership is all about getting behind somebody because you think your life's going to get better. They're going to make your life better, and that all starts with confidence. And you'll get some breaks. Take my old company, Papa John's. In this situation, they basically had the best of all worlds. Basically, they could do no wrong. It's as good as it gets. Cheese was at an all-time low. Labor, you could serve the pizza in 2 hours and still get away with it. The phones are ringing off the hook. Oil's cheap. So we've had a great 2-month run of Papa John's. Now, what's going to happen? Cheese has doubled the last 4 weeks, from $1 a pound to over $2 a pound. Labor, to your point, people are getting paid not to come home. With the economy opening back up, they're going to have less sales. And so you combine that with all the other things that they've done with the brand, in the next 2 or 3 months is going to be extremely difficult for my friends and my colleagues at Papa John's. That's what's going to be interesting to watch, where everything was in their favor. Stock went to $80 a share. Now everything's going against the grain. And it's going to be fun to watch and see how they are innovative, enthusiastic, and make the effort to make sure that they don't go down as the economy reopens.
Papa John Schnatter, let's talk about the third E. So you have effort, enthusiasm, and being entrepreneurial. For a business owner, when you say entrepreneurial, what does that mean, especially as you're coming out from this crisis and you have to use your ingenuity in order to build back up? Expand upon entrepreneurialism a little bit.
In my heart of hearts, entrepreneurship is tinkering, trial and error, finding ways that work and finding ways that don't work, and separating the two. Things that don't work, discard it. Things that are good and work, hold on to it. But right now, it's the multitude and the dichotomy of having the ability to go in multiple directions quick, because things are going to change quick. That's going to define the difference between great entrepreneurs who are going to thrive through this mess and folks that are probably going to struggle a little bit. But entrepreneurship, in my mind, is innovative, creativity, and looking for things that nobody else thought of. That's what all great businesses come from, 1 or 2 people or 3 people that simply figured out a better way to do something, a better product, a better system, more efficient, more productive. That, in my heart and soul, is entrepreneurship to the core.
When you founded Papa John's in 1984, in your broom closet, you surely had no idea that eventually it would grow to become a company with 5,400 franchise locations. When it comes to entrepreneurship, I mean, you're pointing out about problem solving and being able to figure out solutions and work within that construct of a crisis situation and figuring out what can you do to actually improve and build up and get things better. What are the keys to entrepreneurialism, to actually successfully solving problems and navigating that kind of situation, Papa John?
There was no doubt that the funnest time in the whole 5,400 store ride was the broom closet. When you're in a broom closet and it's basically life or death and you're overdrawing the checking account, I remember one night, my brother and I, we were running it. He was driving and I was making the pizzas. We did $240 one night, $240 in a broom closet. And we were jumping up and down. We thought, if you can do $240 in a broom closet on a Tuesday night, we're going to be rich sooner or later. But figuring out that broom closet, 50-cent beers in the front, $5 pizzas in the back, 50-cent game of pool. Now that was fun, and that was the funnest days of the entire ride, was the broom closet, mixed lounge, and making it happen from nothing.
Yeah, and so that's the thing about entrepreneurs, is if you go into creative business, because you see a need. there's something, let's say there's not the kind of pizza service that you're looking for. You see that need. You decide, I want to creatively fill that need by creating my own business. That's solving a problem then and there, and the best entrepreneurs really seem to be able to see the problems sometimes before they even come about, and then figure out, okay, here's what needs to be done in order to address this situation, maybe in advance or maybe just shortly after it happens. And I think that that's something that is a real testament to entrepreneurs such as yourself, who are able to take something, to build something from nothing, and then also be able to navigate the uncharted waters of building a business and growing it through a crisis like this and otherwise, day to day.
Well, exactly. There are some entrepreneurs that get it right from the start. Fred Smith at FedEx, he knew he wanted to deliver packages overnight, and he stuck to that game plan, and look what happened. Some entrepreneurs start out one way and exercise what I call optionality. Optionality is where you're looking for something over here and you find the answer over here, and you have the ability, the flexibility, and the versatility to move from over here to there. That's why government never comes up with any cures for diseases, and entrepreneurs do. I mean, an entrepreneur could be looking for an Alzheimer's pill and stumble upon something that's for blood pressure. Government can't do that because it's centralized and it doesn't have what I call optionality. Entrepreneurs have optionality.
I think it's such an important distinction, the idea, Papa John Schnatter, that optionality is not something that government has, which is why I want to ask you a question about what politicians should keep in mind about helping small businesses to grow back into prosperity as opposed to getting in the way. What do you think elected officials don't know or understand about the small business environment and business in general that they should understand as we have to recover from this crisis?
Well, let's just use Exhibit A, this crisis. Everybody is taking a cut. Everybody's taking it on the chin. But, I mean, I haven't heard any government employees taking cuts or anybody at universities outside maybe the athletic departments taking cuts. So when this concept is we're all in this together, it's usually applicable unless you're working for the government. So government just needs to get out of the way and let entrepreneurs be entrepreneurs. I do agree with the stimulus. I think we had to do something, but the amount of waste and theft on this, pick your number, 2 trillion, 3 trillion, 4 trillion, is going to be huge. But the sooner we can get entrepreneurs and small businesses back on their feet and get government out of the way, the sooner we'll get to be prosperous again.
When you talk about getting government out of the way, one of the great things that I've seen from President Trump and his administration and governors around the country has been this move to deregulate. In some cases, they say, let's do this temporarily because of the crisis, and then we'll bring back those regulations. I'm of the mindset regulations, more often than not, tend to get in the way of businesses and entrepreneurs being able to succeed and help bring their employees to prosperity and bring our economy to greater prosperity and really help gin up the environment in our country, make sure that we're so as powerful and prosperous and successful as we've been. And so I would encourage as well that those politicians who have temporarily waived regulation also look at permanently waiving those kinds of regulations to, as you say, get government out of the way of business.
Well, exactly. If you take 85–90% of the Fortune 500 companies that existed 30 years ago, they no longer exist because corporate America has all these rules and all these processes, and you got what I call these corporate geniuses. And you have it in academia, you have it in government, where you basically got a bunch of domesticated dogs that are trying to run with a pack of wolves in the wild, and they're getting eaten alive. And entrepreneurship is about being, Trump, he's an entrepreneur. I mean, he's got scars, he's got battle wounds, he's got battle scars. I mean, he's been bankrupt 4 or 5 times. So when you've been an entrepreneur and you've been out in the real world, and that's the problem with government and academia, in corporate America, I'll take, Papa John's, for example. There's nobody on that board that knows how to make a pizza. There's nobody on that board that could run a Papa John's pizzeria. Now, how are they going to compete against a mom and pop, an entrepreneur who's used to the real world and used to competing with reality? And so less government, the better.
Yeah, I think that's such an important point as well. Just a few minutes left with you, Papa John Schnatter, our guest here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. When you look at government, the politicians, some have a business background. President Trump is one example. We've got some members of Congress who have business backgrounds, whether small business or large business, but most are not. Federal Reserve Board, for example, is made up of people almost entirely not from the private sector, and yet they seem to presume to know how a business should or should not conduct itself. And I think that is presumptuous and that is audacious on their part. And I always like when we have a conversation like the one we're having right now, where we're talking about how government doesn't know better than the small business owner who's trying to figure out how they're going to build up from this crisis. I mean, even coming back with the security precautions and the safety precautions and all the things with regards to coronavirus, I much more trust a small business owner to innovatively and entrepreneurially address that problem than any government bureaucrat that says, hey, this is how you should do it.
Well, to your point, if an entrepreneur has skin in the game,
exactly.
I mean, they have their whole livelihood, plus usually their name, in my case, their name on the door, their recipes, their gadgets, whatever they're doing, they have skin in the game. You take the board of directors, will pick on Papa John's or any other board, they probably own less than 0.5% of the company. They have no skin in the game. Federal Reserve, they have no skin in the game. So these folks can go along and make these politically correct decisions and pretend like they know what they're talking about. And like the banking system, they just keep blowing it up. And what happens is the people that do have skin in the game, the middle class and the working class that make this country great, they end up paying for all this nonsense because these bureaucrats, these politicians, these government officials, they have no skin in the game. And so they have no skin in the game. They can make dumb decisions and no consequences. Where an entrepreneur, I mean, if he's not successful or she's not successful, they lose everything. Skin in the game is the big difference.
And final question for you before we let you go. I know that you've also been doing some, as many folks like yourself have been doing, some philanthropic efforts in order to help small businesses get back on their feet. I want to give you a moment to tell us what you're doing.
Well, we're doing a lot of things with churches. We're feeding the frontline folks, frontline defenders. We're doing some things with the LA Food Bank, feed those folks. We're doing $1 million for entrepreneurs and employees. And Jimmy, it's not enough. It's a start. But the key component here is as much the effort, we talked about effort, and the spirit that we all need to get behind these people. We need to get behind small business. We need to get behind our frontline folks and the people that are doing the heavy lifting. And that's just a small piece. This will probably evolve into a bigger piece because I love business. I love small business. I love entrepreneurs. And when I do something, I want to make sure it makes an impact. I don't want to give money that's wasted money, and I don't want to give money that's not going to be useful. I want to give money where it actually has a benefit and people can get back on their feet and charge ahead and, again, be part of this American dream. That's what my hopes and prayers are. The money and the effort is significant, but not as much as the spirit we all need to get this country back on its feet.
And I will say that when it comes to the entrepreneur in the business world or individuals who said, I'm going to give back to my community, and whether through a foundation like yours or individual contributions, help people to get through these difficult times by getting access to support that they need. I much more trust that than any sort of government program, going to our points here today. John Schnatter, a.k.a. Papa John, so great to have you on this show. Great insights, and thanks so much for taking the time today.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and stay well and be healthy.
You too.
Once again, Papa John Schnatter joining us here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Very interesting points. I mean, look, we talked a little bit about government, getting government out of the way, but even more, it's on the entrepreneur. The entrepreneur to innovate, and it's getting government out of the way so then they can use their effort, their enthusiasm, and their entrepreneurial spirit to address their own challenges. And that's so significant. Because we are talking about businesses, business owners that know what they need to do in order to make their company succeed. They know what they need to do in order to prosper at life, in order to serve their employees and help improve lives from their own experience in their own way. Want to give a quick off-air note to Nathan Matoush. Just keep it going. We're good. Don't worry about it. Our software program has frozen at this moment, and so we'll give it a moment to try to resuscitate here. But when it comes to small businesses, I'm going to make this point. We might tomorrow focus our Free to Choose Friday on what makes businesses prosper, what government can do in order to, or should not do, in order to help promote the greatest amount of prosperity for the greatest number of people. And that would be getting out of the way, certainly, in terms of regulation, but also reducing taxes, keeping taxes low. In individual states, you want to make sure your budget's balanced, not be focused on outrageously increasing taxes, but go through and do your level best to reduce the burden on individuals, on small businesses who are struggling day in and day out right now, and on larger businesses too. There are a lot of large businesses who are closing shop. I mean, my mother texted me before the show saying that Bath & Body Works, where she used to work, is permanently closing 50 stores across the country. That is stunning for a major company like Bath & Body Works, but it should not be all that surprising given the dynamics that we have been seeing and everything that is at play. So, when we're talking here on Jimmy at the Crossroads about entrepreneurialism in the government context, that's what we mean, is getting government off the backs of the private sector, getting government, as Papa John said, out of the way, as opposed to being an impediment to progress, as opposed to being an impediment to individual opportunity. And that is something that we are always, always striving for here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. So, that is it for us today. Tomorrow is Free to Choose Friday. Looking forward to what we have in store, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads tomorrow. Working on the final product. Like I said, Free to Choose Friday. Still figuring out exactly what it'll be, but looks like it will be related to small business and bringing our economy back through the free market, not through all sorts of expansive government programs. So working on that next week, by the way. Pete Hegseth from the Fox News Channel will join us, and so will Dinesh D'Souza, who will be one of our Free to Choose Friday guests next Friday when we focus on socialism, and especially socialism and young people. But that is it for us today. I'm Jimmy Sengenberger, coming to you in partnership with the Washington Examiner on Jimmy at the Crossroads. Thanks so much for joining us, being a part of the program. My thanks to Roshini Rajkumar, Lieutenant Stephen Rogers, and Papa John Schnatter for joining us today, as well as Nathan Matoush, producer extraordinaire, and our partners at the Washington Examiner. Be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel and stay well and healthy. May God bless America.